Welcome to the Anchor Church podcast. Each week, we'll bring you the teaching from our central campus. We hope it's an encouragement to you. Thanks for listening.
The Olympics end today. Maybe, are you glad they're over? My husband and I have been enjoying watching the Olympics. We like to sit on our comfortable couch and be astounded at the hard things that athletes do and ask each other, like, why would they subject themselves to that kind of training? Because it's hard, isn't it? I, though, secretly in my childhood heart, think that I can maybe do that too. Get stronger, jump higher, run faster. And so I dusted off an old, hard workout routine on YouTube that was recommended to me, and then I paid the price for it for the next 4 days. Awesome, yes. Yeah, but we do. We like to imitate people that we admire, don't we? Whether it's athletes or influencers, or if you're a kid, it's likely to be a superhero. Spider-Man and Superman are the top-notch superheroes that kids like to imitate. And surely if they put on their costume that has built-in muscles and a cape, they will be able to leap tall buildings in a single bound and fight for truth and justice and the greater good. In fact, so many kids have gotten concussions and broken arms and fallen out windows thinking that they could fly, that some manufacturers now put a warning on the package that says, warning, Superman costume does not enable flight. We need these things, don't we? Because overconfidence in our youthful aspirations and a fancy costume and bad judgment equals trouble, doesn't it? They need a reality check, our youthful aspirations, don't they? This morning, we're going to be in a story. We're going to begin the story of Joseph. Joseph is Jacob's son. We've been learning about Jacob. Joseph is a young man, and he's a man of youthful aspirations. He's also kind of childishly immature. He's a man who has dreams, and he's a man who has a fancy costume that makes him feel empowered. But we're going to see in Joseph's life that his overconfidence and his fancy costume and his childish immaturity and bad judgment lead to trouble. He is going to need a reality check. And so Joseph is headed in that direction. I want to zoom out, though, as we've been looking at Genesis over these past several weeks, like Brian said, we've been seeing this big picture of beginnings. When God created the cosmos and he called it good, and he created you and me, and he was delighted. And then we went our own way and things began to fall apart. But then God created a plan that he is relentlessly pursuing to reconcile us to himself. And that one day he will redeem and restore all things. Because his plan, in the words of Tim Mackey, the founder and the teacher at Bible Project, his plan is to take what's been separated, heaven and earth, in two separate spheres, separated by a large chasm, and bring heaven on earth once again. Heaven on earth, that thing that we long for. We long for justice. We long for healing. We long for peace, for what we call shalom, that deep, abiding sense that all is well and everything is complete and whole. We're following God's promises through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God has promised to bring descendants to number the stars to these patriarchs. He's promised them land that they would inherit and pass along for generations. He's promised to bless them, and he's also promised to make them a blessing, and that through them he would bless all nations on the earth. Abraham has children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren by this time, and some of that fulfillment of God's promises is looking like it's taking place. But we're going to zoom in on the life of Jacob's son, Joseph, today. Joseph is not Jacob's firstborn, like might be predictable if you were a cultural student of that day, because firstborns were where it was at. He wasn't his secondborn, he was 11th born son, and so we pay attention. What is God doing through Joseph? The timeline of Genesis is 2,000 years. Joseph gets 5% of that, but he gets 25% of the ink in Genesis. What is God doing through Joseph? In Genesis, it's a template for the bigger story of God. And so what is God doing is he caps off Genesis through the life of Joseph, who's going to take us all the way to the end. What does he want us to know? What's the most important thing? So we're going to be all over the place. We're going to turn to Genesis 37. We'll start there, where Joseph has been helping his brothers with the flocks. They're a shepherding family. The older brothers in this situation have just done something naughty, and Joseph, because he is an annoying kid brother, has tattled on them to his dad. We'll start with verse 3. Now Israel, a.k.a. Jacob, if you remember from last week, if not, go back and listen to it, loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him. They couldn't speak a kind word to him. Joseph, though, had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf stood up and stood upright. Your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." Go, Joseph. His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream. And he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Well, there's a lot here that we can unpack. I want to highlight two things. One is, in this passage, we see brokenness. We see brokenness in the people, the very ones that God is choosing to partner with him to fulfill his promises. We see favoritism. Jacob had suffered with the favoritism of his father, where he chose Esau over him. He is now demonstrating favoritism as he chooses Joseph over his brothers. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I speak that word. We see hatred between brothers who are meant to love each other. They hated him. They hated him all the more. The text says they hated him all the more. They were jealous of Joseph. Such brokenness, a problem that started with the very first siblings that walked the face of this earth, Cain and Abel, and continues in our families today in ways that are ugly and we don't like to think about. The second thing we see, though, that even in this brokenness, God is revealing himself. He's revealing himself even in the brokenness. He wants us to know what he's up to. And no amount of brokenness can change the fact that he is still pursuing us. And so in this instance, he's giving Joseph a dream. And it's not that dreams are ordinary dreams like we would have today, and we'd go like, "Oh, that was a weird dream, wasn't it? You wake up, what did I eat last night?" No, this dream that Joseph had is seen by his brothers and his father as something prophetic, because dreams were felt to be prophetic back in Joseph's day. So they take it seriously. And they react with anger. It's almost a visceral response. "We're not going to bow down to you. Who do you think you are, Joseph?" In fact, their reaction to Joseph is going to take him on a journey that he does not anticipate. It's going to be hard. And so I want to take us to the next stopping point, big stopping point in Joseph's life. It's a little bit of a spoiler alert. We're going to jump forward to Genesis 41, a couple of verses there that I want to highlight because I want us to see where Joseph lands in this part of our Genesis story. In verse 40 of chapter 41, we see these words. He's talking with Pharaoh, the most influential leader in the world in Joseph's day. Little Joseph and Pharaoh are having a conversation. Pharaoh says to him, "You shall be in charge," verse 40, "of all of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you." So Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Joseph has grown from a 17-year-old tattletale, bratty kid who's proud and arrogant with a superhero costume to now a 30-year-old man. He's left the land of his family and he's landed in Egypt, the most powerful country on the planet at that time. And instead of being the golden child who's bullied by his jealous brothers, he's having a conversation with the most influential person that exists in his day. It turns out that Joseph will be a great leader. He will be used by God in powerful ways. But I want to caution us, because it would be really easy for us to look at the life of Joseph and go like, oh, I want to be a great leader. I want to be successful. Like, I want things to work out well for me. And yes, we can learn from Joseph. He would be a good person to study. But I want to show us that the primary message in this passage is not how to be like Joseph. The primary message is all about God. That God is faithful to his promises, that he will fulfill his promises to renew and restore and reconcile us to him, to bring heaven on earth once again. But what we also see through the life of Joseph is that God's promises, the way that he fulfills them, doesn't always look like we expect. Hardly ever does, in fact. It's important for us to realize this truth, because if we don't recognize God's faithfulness, we end up disappointed, disillusioned, and many times we give up hope. So what we want to do is we want to look at some truths that are present in Joseph's story, and we want to learn from them so that we can recognize and reframe what God's faithfulness looks like in our lives. We're going to first look at the rest of Genesis 37 because it takes a turn. It's a little bit later. The brothers are north. They're grazing their sheep. Joseph, the youngest, has stayed at home, but his dad sends him up, hey, go check on your brothers. He's like, sure, Dad. So he goes up and he sees his hated brothers, or the brothers who hate him. And as they see him coming from a distance, they plot a plan to kill him. They are so full of his dreams, and they hate hearing him. They're so jealous of him. They're like, let's do him in. There's argument about it. The firstborn, who's supposed to be responsible, says, no, let's just throw him in this big well. It's dry. He'll live for a little bit, then he'll die. He'll be off our hands. And then one of them sees a traveling band of merchants coming from north to south. And he said, hey, let's make a buck. We can sell him. Let's sell Joseph. And that's what they do. 20 pieces of silver. The deal is done. They strip him of his robe. They slaughter a goat. They cover his robe in the goat's blood. And then they do one of the cruelest things you can imagine. They take it to their father, who loves this boy. And they say, look, Dad, I think it's your son's robe. Do you think it could be? Can you imagine Jacob's pain as he holds this thing that he's sure is Joseph's robe, and it's covered with blood? And he says to himself, and out loud as he weeps and he cries, he says, my son has surely been devoured. And his heart is broken, and he vows to grieve until the day he dies, because he thinks his Joseph is dead. Unbeknownst to him, Joseph is on a journey to Egypt. Joseph has had a dream. He's had a destination put in his heart. Not a dream that's random, but a dream that God himself has put in his heart. This destination, though, has become for Joseph a significant detour. And that's the first thing we're going to learn from Joseph's life, is that destinations include detours. Detours are what changes us from where we thought we were going, where we wanted to go, where we thought we were going. It's a change up. So you might have thought that you were going to be a husky, but now you're a cougar. So is that like good news or bad? Who knows? Let's have an argument about it. You thought, though, that you'd live in that dream house, but circumstances have dictated that now it's time to sell. You thought that you'd never imagine being single again in your 40s. You thought that by now you'd be farther along in your career. Sometimes detours are relational. You've married the love of your life, and you thought that that relationship would last forever. Detours are anything that goes off script from the future that we wrote for ourselves to a new place. They can feel like a gift, but oftentimes they feel unwelcome. They feel like an intrusion. They certainly can feel intolerable in certain instances, because with detours, it is painfully obvious that we are not in charge of our script. We're not in charge of our script. I find that there's tension here because I recognize that God is writing a greater story. He himself, the maker of all things, allows us, though, to have editing rights in our scripts. And so decisions that we make as he gives us free will can alter our script. When we hold on to grudges with people who think differently than we do, when we cut corners in our business or our finances to get ahead, we're rewriting parts of our script. But the good news about God is that he is the only one. It's one of my favorite things about he's the only one who can take those rewrites and weave them into the overarching story that he is writing. And if we allow him to, he will incorporate us into that greater story that he has. Because he is faithful to his promises. And he uses, at times, detours to get to them. There are two main ways that detours can affect us. C.S. Lewis writes this, that you'll certainly carry out God's promises, but it makes a difference to you whether you serve him like Judas or like John. Detours can derail us. It's the first way we can interact with them. We can lose sight of God. We can begin questioning what God has been doing in our lives. Was he really leading me to leave that job? Because, man, I've been unemployed now for a long time. Or to stop that relationship because it is lonely. Was he really leading us to start this recovery journey? Because, man, recovery is the hardest thing I've ever imagined in my life. Was that really him I encountered, or was it some emotional experience that I had? Detours are a favorite scheme of the enemy of our souls to call into question the goodness of God and his presence in our lives. He loves to plant seeds of doubt that God has been faithful in our past. So we look back at experiences and we diminish them because we say, oh, I was just young and immature. We look at our present and we ask ourselves things like, I don't feel God, so surely he's not here. And the enemy of our souls says, that's right, he's not. He doesn't care. He doesn't see you. He wants to steal our future hope by giving us narratives that say things like, because of what I've done, I'll always be on plan B of life. It would be easy for Joseph to think that he's on a detour in this situation because instead of his brothers bowing down, they have betrayed him and he's abandoned. Instead of him being honored, he's been a slave. Instead of him being in the land of promise, he's in the land of foreigners and pagan gods, and nothing is the way it's supposed to be in Joseph's life. Some of you know that I sensed a call to ministry from 20 years career as a pediatrician. An inspiring young pastor called out what he saw were pastoral gifts, and I will tell you, it made my heart sing. It was, yes, finally, I didn't know that medicine could be such a great preparation for what I was really called to do. And I loved it so much. I started seminary. I felt like I was doing what I was made for, and then a little over 5 years in, I noticed a shift. And I could tell some things were changing, and our church had changed, our budget had changed, and it felt tender to me. It felt hard. And I remember sitting down with the lead pastor, and we were sketching out a new role for me, and he was kind. He's like, well, what do you like? And we named a lot of those things, and we incorporated them into this new job description that would be a better fit for where we were going forward. And so I committed to praying about that. As I committed to praying about that, I remember waking up one morning with a clearest answer to prayer that I've ever heard. It was, I can't take that job. And immediately, like things are going through my mind. Like, what do you mean I can't take that job? Like, what am I going to do? Like, I already left my pediatric job, right? Like, my husband has a job here. We can't move anywhere. Like, well, I'm like tethered to him. And it felt disorienting. It felt derailing. It was a detour for me, and it didn't make sense. Detours can derail us. But I want to testify to the fact that detours can also deepen us. Detours can also deepen us. They lead us into places we never would have gone on our own, where we're less distracted with what's familiar, and where God's nearness to us becomes easier than we normally would notice. And as I stepped down from that ministry role, because that's what I did, it was interesting because I heard God say in my spirit, I want you to commit, Susan, to taking the next 6 weeks and committing to not commit. You're going to be anxious. Your schedule's going to be wide open. It's going to be crickets. Let me fill your calendar. I was like, okay, Lord. It was very clear. That first week, I got a text from someone who I had known from 20 years earlier when our kids went to the same school. We never hung out before. She's like, hey, so-and-so and so-and-so are getting together. We're going to have coffee. Do you want to come? And I was so suspicious. I was like, oh, great. They want me to be on some board or something, right? But I'll go. And so I go, and I'm like, hi, guys. And what I learned was that these two women had moved from our suburban town into Tacoma, that they were doing ministry to people in need in a variety of ways, and that every month they met together to encourage each other as followers of Jesus, period. And I began to recognize that God was giving grace in my detour and that he was deepening me and he was giving me, I called them grace nuggets because it was just like every so often it's like something would show up, like, oh, you're in my detour. Praise God. Yes. And it was a really special time. I couldn't see the final destination, but I knew he was with me in the detour. God is at work fulfilling promises in Joseph's life, and there's a good chance that he can't yet see it. Let's follow him to Genesis 39. We're going to be in verses 2 through 6. What's happening here is Joseph has been taken to Egypt. He's been sold as a servant in Potiphar's house. Now, Potiphar is a higher up. He's the captain of Pharaoh's guard. So he's got some influence. I want you to pay attention to what the Lord is doing in this passage as we read it. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. We see in this passage that God is with Joseph in his detour. That he's the one blessing him to be prosperous, to be successful in all things. And that it's through Joseph that the Lord is now blessing this pagan leader. Do you see the promises beginning to unfold? Even in this first generation, second generation, third generation. But also after a while, we need to move on. There's more. There always is. Handsome Joseph, starting with verse 6, I'm going to tell the story through chapter 39. He's harassed by Potiphar's wife. She wants him. She's like, Joseph is handsome. I want that guy. She invites him to stay with her. He keeps his integrity. He keeps his distance. And one day she's just had it and she makes a grab for him. Grabs his cloak and says, I want you to be with me. And he hightails it out of there. And there she is standing with this cloak of Joseph. And she finds that she's got some pretty damning evidence in her hands. And she accuses him of sexual assault. Joseph has this horrible he said, she said with his boss's wife that isn't going to land well. And so Joseph, who has been blessed by God, Joseph, who has been a blessing to people in high places in faraway lands, finds himself spiraling downward and is thrown in prison. Wrongfully so. Not only is he on a major detour in his life, but after being encouraged by these grace nuggets along the way, like, hey, things are going well, I'm working for Potiphar, it's going to be great. This thing happens in his life because we don't just have peak experiences, do we, when things go well? But God also is taking Joseph as he does us. Sometimes he allows us to be in the pit. And for Joseph, that looks like prison. Destinations include peaks and pits. We know these times, don't we? Where you feel like you're finally arriving only to have things come crashing down. Maybe you're an athlete and you've worked so hard, and then the first game of the season comes and you have an injury that takes you out for the rest of the time. Or maybe you're a parent and you've been so intentional with your parenting, but your kids are now in high school and they do not care about your values anymore. There's hope. Where is God when we are in the pit? It's in these times God uses peaks to encourage us, right? And he uses pits to build our character, but I want to be careful here. It is not as simple as pits are for our own good and peaks are for when we are good. God, our relationship with God is not simplistic and transactional in that way. Joseph didn't get sold into slavery and tossed in prison for his own good, but God will use it for his good. God takes no pleasure in our suffering. But he doesn't waste a moment of it. Not a moment. It's when we encounter pits that we can often see him more clearly. As C.S. Lewis says, he shouts in our pains. It's a megaphone to arouse a deaf world. He wants us to know he's present. But there's also a bigger picture here that I want us to see. I want us to zoom out. God isn't just working in us when we encounter pits in our lives. He is working in all things, redeeming creation from the pit. From the very brokenness and the darkness in the world that's caused our pain in the first place, he's with you in your anxiety, and he is looking toward a day when there is no more fear. He's with you in that difficult diagnosis, and he is looking toward a day when there is no sickness, there is no disease, there is no decay or death. He is with you in these places because he is bringing heaven on earth once again. And as he brings justice in place of corruption and mercy in place of vengeance and healing in place of brokenness, love instead of hatred and joy instead of apathy, he is doing these things as he looks to the horizon and he's making all things new. We need to follow Joseph's story into the next chapter to understand more about how God is with us in our pits and our detours. So Genesis chapter 40, Joseph has had favor in prison. He's actually been made the supervisor of some of the king's most prized and high-level confidants, the cupbearer and the baker. They've had dreams, and Joseph, now humble, offers through God to interpret them for him. The cupbearer's dream would mean that he would be restored to his position. The baker's dream, not so much, that his life would end because of his betrayal. Joseph wonders now, hey, cupbearer, hey, remember me, would you? Like the Hebrew who interpreted your dream. When you get with Pharaoh again, would you remind him that I'm here? Would you tell him that I've been wrongfully imprisoned? Joseph maybe sees hope on the horizon because here's someone who has Pharaoh's ear and he can help. And this peak moment seems hopeful. But Joseph waits, and he waits, and he waits, and he waits. No one comes for him. No one. Joseph's life hits a new low. There's a book with the title, All I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. It says things like, hey, play fair, share your things, don't hit each other. Because the premise is that in the course of our lives, we get things complicated and we sometimes lose sight of the basics that we learned when we were so young and moldable. And so it calls us back to those. But even more so, it's true of our souls. It's true of our souls that in those deep inward parts that dared to hope one day for what's right and true and beautiful, for what we felt when we first met God or what we think we might feel if we ever have the courage to trust him. That someone would lift the heavy burdens from us, that someone would lift our eyes to the horizon where it might feel like there's hope, to heal our broken hearts, to hold us in our pain. Joseph has been a slave, he's been a servant, he's been a prisoner for 13 years now. He's been on detours that rival the best Hollywood scripts. He's been ridiculed, humiliated, victimized, trafficked, assaulted, falsely imprisoned, and now forgotten. And it's in these moments that we and he need to remember what we learned in kindergarten. That God is faithful to his promises. That God is faithful to his promises. He's faithful to them in the past, in the present, and in the future. And that even when God's faithfulness doesn't look like we expect it to, because detours have come and we're in the pit, that they don't take away from the fact that God is faithful to his promises, that we need not let our detours derail us, that he can deepen us in the process, and that he's with us along the way. That 6 weeks after I stepped down from my beloved job was long, and it felt crickety at times. It got close to the end of that, and I wondered what was on the horizon. I still had no idea for quite a long time. But it was remarkable, the grace nugget that I had the very next day after the 6 weeks was over. I got a text from a friend that, hey, did you know that Anchor is hiring? You should apply. Still on that detour. I got to say, there are pits and peaks in all of things. It's not a tidy bow that's put on a package. Thankful for God's presence. Joseph's story is also coming full circle as we look to Genesis 41, that spoiler alert destination. Pharaoh's center stage. He's had 2 dreams. There's a theme here. Joseph is somebody who he is told, can interpret these dreams because none of his wise men can. So he gets pulled up out of the pit. And Joseph says, I can't interpret your dreams, but I have a God who can. He's humble. Joseph, who's been on a 13-year detour from the dream that God put in his heart, explains the meaning of Pharaoh's dreams. Pharaoh, listen up. You're going to have 7 years of plenty. It's going to be more than you ever imagined. And then they are going to be followed by 7 years of famine. And it is going to be so hard. And unless you bring someone who's administratively minded and wise and discerning, you're going to have a hard time surviving this thing. I want you to listen to the words of Pharaoh, pagan Pharaoh, whose people think that he is God. He looks at Joseph in the presence of his court and his wise men, and he says in verse, he's in word 41 somewhere, can we find anyone like this man, Joseph? One in whom is the Spirit of God. One in whom is the Spirit of God. Joseph, that Hebrew slave, that servant, that one who's been scorned and sold, that one who's been imprisoned, and he sees the Spirit of God at work in Joseph's life. Do you see the promises starting to unfold? Joseph is going to partner with God in the most gracious way as he becomes a blessing to the land of Egypt. I'm going to invite the band up as we close. Joseph shows us a picture of God's faithfulness to his promises, even when the faithfulness doesn't look like we expect. God's with us in our detours, our pits, and our peaks. He never gives up on us. He never is going to give up on his plan to bring heaven on earth again, and that can look a million ways. But in fact, the thing that's so cool about Genesis and the believers, and I believe that it's the capstone of the book, is that he points to a greater Joseph. He points to the one who would come by the name of Jesus Christ, also a beloved son, also a shepherd, a good one, also one who would be hated by his brothers, also one who would be stripped of his clothes, one who would be sold for profit and wrongly imprisoned and forgotten. Jesus, who was obedient to the point of death and who was raised to life again so that you and I, regardless of our detours, can have life in his name. Do you feel that? You can have life in his name, and it starts now. Through Jesus, we look forward to on earth as it is in heaven, as he sends out imperfect people like you and me to be part of his promise fulfillment. This morning, there's a good chance that many of you are facing detours. They feel discouraging. You don't know if God is with you in them. Can I just encourage you? As we look at the life of Joseph, we see that God is with you. As he sends Jesus, we say, God is with us. God with us. Jesus Christ, Emmanuel. I pray that during your detour, you're courageous enough to invite God to take you deeper. That's what he wants to do. He wants you near. Maybe you've come through detours and pits, and you're now in a place with others where they may look to you and say, the words of Pharaoh to Joseph is like, can we find anyone like this in whom is the Spirit of God? I pray that God would multiply your ministry, that he would overflow in you so that others, through the blessing that you've received, would be blessed. We're going to move into a time of communion. There are prayer team members on each side of the auditorium. If you would like prayer this morning, and I encourage you to, I think everyone I need prayer every day, all day. Go. Ask with them. Discern what God is doing in your mind and your heart. Communion's going to be up front and in the back. This is a time when we celebrate the blood that Jesus gave, the body that he gave for us so that we can be part of his body as we are blessed to be a blessing.